Welcome, everybody. Hello. Good to see you all. If you can turn your camera on, it would be great to see your faces. Welcome to Past and Present with Allison Gilbert and guests. My name is Andrew Engel. I'm Senior Programmer at Reimagine. Our mission at Reimagine is to help people of all backgrounds face adversity, loss, mortality, and channel the hard parts of life into meaningful action and growth. For Grief is the sponsor of Past and Present. For Grief offers a better way for people to navigate loss by offering unprecedented and direct access to the country's most prominent grief experts and authors, present company definitely included. You can learn more about For Grief at forgrief.com. I have a few Zoom tips for you. You can view a live transcription by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Also, you can save the chat by clicking on the three dots within your chat box. And feel free to send me a note if you are having any technical difficulty. I might be able to help you. I wanted to say a few words about Allison before handing this off to her. Allison Gilbert is the author of numerous books, including Listen World, the new biography of Hearst newspaper columnist Elsie Robinson. Her book, Past and Present, Keeping Memories of Loved Ones Alive, is the namesake for this beloved series. It reveals creative ways to remember family and friends we never want to forget. And you can follow Allison on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. She's everywhere as A. Gilbert Writer. And with that, it's my pleasure to hand this over to Allison, who will introduce our very special guest.
Thank you so much, Andy. It is my favorite time of the month, the last Thursday, which means that I get to join you in community again. If you are new to the Past and Present series, welcome. It is really my honor to be here. And as Andy invited you already, I welcome you if you are able to turn on your camera. We have a choice. We can do these conversations as a webinar where we don't see anyone, but we, in fact, are intentional and we want to see everybody. We want people to feel that they are in conversation. And that brings me to the next part of my introduction, which is that Christina Serio is always here with me. She is waving her hand. I anoint her during these conversations to go through the chat. So number one, go into the chat now. Tell us where you are joining us from. I would love to learn. I am in New York. Priscilla Gilman is in New York. Andy happens to be in New York, so we're kind of lopsided today, but I would love to hear where you guys are, number one. Number two, what Christina also will do, if something Priscilla says captures your interest, if you are coming here today because you have a burning question, maybe you have read the incredible reviews that her book is getting. Maybe you have tons of questions for her. Please make sure you put them in the chat. That is how we will know you have a question. Christina will go through the chat and then she will choose the questions that feel most applicable to the most people. So with that, let me just say, I have one more critical announcement. The Past and Present Conversation series is undergoing a seismic shift that I am very excited about. I will share what that change is towards the end of our conversation today. So if you want to know what's going on behind the curtain at the Reimagine and For Grief Past and Present commitment, I wanted to tell you what was going on as soon as we have announced it. Internally, I want you to know what that is. And so please stay on towards the end and I will let you know what's shaken. So with no further ado, let me say welcome to my friend and the author, Priscilla Gilman. Hi, Priscilla.
Allison, it's so wonderful to be here with you. And I have to say, I love it that we can see everybody. Because I've
Yes,
done a lot of these where I don't see anyone.
I
And
know.
it's so nice to see all of your faces. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you.
So, Priscilla, there's a lot for us to talk about. Your book, The Critic's Daughter, throughout many of the pages really just stunned me, shocked me, surprised me, made me sad for you. Complicated relationships are challenging. And I want to move through these types of conversations and invite people to share and ask you questions about managing grief when things are not so rosy.
Yeah.
So the reason why I think your book, The Critic's Daughter, is so incredibly powerful has to do with who you are and how you come to the conversation. You are a former professor of English literature at both Yale and Vassar. You brought that sense of, I have your books here, both of them.
Oh,
You brought that to this book, The Anti-Romantic Child, which is really about, well, we can have you explain what that's about. A delightful book. And then, of course, your new book, The Critic's Daughter. There's your name, Priscilla Gilman.
Here's my galley, Allison.
I love it. And look at Priscilla and look at your dad. I just love the cover picture. Do you remember when that photo was actually taken of you guys?
I do. And it was taken by Judy Pfeiffer, who was one of my mother's best friends and the ex-wife of Jules Pfeiffer, the famous New Yorker cartoonist and who did the illustrations for Phantom Tollbooth. And it was just a few months before my parents split up.
Oh.
And my sister is actually in the picture too. And when I had to tell her that they were cutting her out for the cover, I was like, Clary, I'm so sorry, but they just wanted to be. And it's actually her Facebook cover photo. Is the photo of the three of us. It's a whole sequence of pictures and they're so beautiful and so moving. And I'm so grateful to Norton for using it. And they actually put us also on the spine of the book.
Oh, I didn't notice that. Let me see.
Yes.
Oh, not on this one because I had the galley. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. Oh,
on this. Great. Yes. And Allison, it's the 100th anniversary of Norton this year. And it's also the year my father would have turned 100.
Oh.
So it says 100 down there and it has a very poignant meaning.
Well, let's talk about your dad, which is really the whole being for this book. Your relationship was complicated, but I want to start just in childhood. He was brilliant. He was a critic, obviously, from the title of your book, The Critic's Daughter. And he was a drama and literary critic. And let me just talk about how big your dad was in this world. He was what we would call a titan of this industry. He was known for being exceptionally tough. One reviewer talked about it being a form of confrontation criticism. Like he was not worried about ruffling feathers. Oh, no.
No. He wanted to ruffle them.
Yeah, that was like sport, right? That was sport. And I also want to give a little color to your childhood, which is like you had an Aunt Tony, but that's not a normal Aunt Tony. Who was your Aunt Tony, Priscilla?
It was Toni Morrison. She was my mother's a literary agent. She's still working. And she was Tony's agent. And The Bluest Eye, which is Tony's first novel, came out the year I was born. My mom had worked with Tony. Tony was an editor. She'd worked with Tony. Tony gave her a manuscript. She sold it and became Tony's agent and dear friend.
I'm sharing that because it is part of the ecosystem of your childhood.
Mhm.
And when things were good and things were positive and rosy, you were exceptionally close to your dad. And I want to read one section. I'm shortening the quote a little bit, but this is from the New York Times about your new book, The Critic's Daughter. In private, as a father, he was mostly a charmer. He was the one who helped with homework, got down on the floor and played. He was chaperone on school trips. He cried at cheesy musicals, and he had a great Cookie Monster voice, which I love. And I should say, one of those musicals, I'm stopping the quote now, was the musical Annie, which Hair, hello, favorite musical of all time.
Allison, of
except
course, of
Love the
course.
song Maybe, which was the Molly song. And I loved, Tomorrow, the actual Annie song, because I wanted to be Annie. So talk about your childhood, and then we'll get into the fractured nature of it. But it seems from the outside looking in the beginning, pretty idyllic.
It was idyllic. My book is, as much as it is a tribute to my father and a reckoning with my father's legacy to me, it's also about a lost New York, a lost intellectual culture. This world where my parents' apartment, rent-controlled apartment on the Upper West Side, was filled with all of these magical, inventive characters, from Toni Morrison to the writer Bernard Malamud, to Joan Didion, who is also my mother's client. And we went to the theater all the time. And Annie, my father was known to be this very harsh theater critic, but he had a soft spot for musicals, and he loved Annie. And he
who doesn't love Annie? But anyway,
if you don't love Annie, there's something wrong with you, Elson. That's what I would say. But and he loved Sandy, the dog, particularly because he was a big dog lover. But we really did have this magical worlds that my sister who's 14 months younger, and we were obsessed with imaginative play. We played with our 150. We each had about 150 dolls and stuffed animals. And we were single mothers of our dolls and stuffed animals. And I write in the book about how my father played a number of magical roles in this universe. He was the minister who married our stuffed penguins to our Madame Alexander dolls, the Reverend Gilman. He was the person that our Paddingtons would visit in the morning for a piece of chocolate and a chat. He was the great finder who could find anything, and he did it with a wonderful flourish when he would find anything. And he loved watching Sesame Street, Zoom, and the Electric Company with us. He loved reading the Oz books to us. He was just completely invested in this religion almost of childhood. And I call him the priest of the cathedral space that was my childhood. And that's a quote from Virginia Woolf, the cathedral space of childhood. And it was magical, and my parents fought, but not in a terrible way. It seemed to be working until it wasn't.
I'm going to fast forward through a lot. So I'm not meaning to give anything that you write short shrift.
Of course.
Your mother decides to leave your dad. Tell me where I get the facts wrong. When you're 10, that's when they get divorced. It was cold. It was hard. There was lots of revelations that came out of this experience, and some of them were unsavory.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were difficult for you to reconcile. In fact, there is a beginning at the beginning of your book. This is what you wrote. You said, "I lost him over and over, many times and in many different ways. This book is my attempt to find him." Tell us about some of those revelations and the tension that erupted as a result.
Yeah. So the first line of the book that comes right before what you read, I say, I lost my father for the first time when I was 10 years old. And then I go into all of these different ways that I lost him, to illness, to he eventually moved to Japan, to his death from lung cancer when I was 36 years old. When I was 10 years old, my parents split up. It actually took them about 7 to 8. We're not exactly sure. I tried to find the papers to certify it, but it took many years for them to get divorced. And that was part of the problem. that it went on and on and on. And when my parents split up, partly as a result of, I found a letter that my father wrote, partly my mother trying to explain things to me, told me things about my father.
Priscilla, I'm sorry, but that letter was something. Can
It
you
was
go into that?
something.
It was something. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I found a letter that my father wrote to his first wife. And reading this letter, it was clear that he was interested in what we would now call BDSM. He was interested in being submissive. And I was 10 years old and I'm reading these details, and it was very shocking and disturbing to me. And I told my mother as soon as she got home. My father was staying with us while my mother was away. My parents had already split up. And I find out that my father had a number of affairs during the marriage, that some of the affairs were with some of his students at Yale, the Yale School of Drama. He was a professor at the Yale School of Drama. He was the theater critic for Newsweek. He was the theater critic for The Nation. And I find out also just how vulnerable and prone to depression my father is, because my father is plunged. He was madly in love with my mother, absolutely devastated when she ended the marriage. He struggled financially for many years. He struggled emotionally. He told me when I was 10 that he sometimes thought he would kill himself if it was not for me and my sister. And that imprinted itself on my brain in a way, like I'm responsible for his survival. And I have to do everything in my power to make sure that he's okay and that he survives.
There is so much here that I imagine will relate or is already relating to so many folks who are watching right now or who will be watching this in the future.
Mm-hmm.
You are talking about the shame involved in these discoveries. You are talking about the burden that gets put on children
Mm-hmm.
unnecessarily and perhaps inappropriately.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, he's the dad with the Cookie Monster voice.
And the
so,
Grover voice. He did Grover and Cookie Monster.
So
yes.
this is like the seed, the germ, the kernel of where I want to go with you right now. Mm-hmm. Is in loss. How do you reconcile these various, all true experiences? How can you have all of them be true and yet have this friction?
Yeah, I love that question, Allison. You know, I think part of the reason I'm seeing somebody in the chat saying they've had that said to them. Yeah, I mean, so many of us, children of parents who are prone to depression or addiction. My father smoked. He died of lung cancer. I always knew he would die from smoking. He had exceptionally good genes, and he always said, I'll quit when I get older, and he never did. And that burden of feeling responsible for a parent's emotional stability, for a parent's happiness, for a parent's well-being. And I think that burden was also placed on me by my mother, because I could see that my mother needed to leave my father. I did not blame her at all for it. I understood she had never been romantically in love with my father. She had married him because she thought he would be a good father, which he was. And she also married him on the rebound, which comes up later in the book. But learning to see both my parents at a very young age as human beings was both a burden and a gift, right? In other words, my father was a very idiosyncratic, very eccentric, very unusual person. But all of us, every one of us, maybe it doesn't happen when you're 10, maybe it happens when you're 40, maybe it happens when you're 60. All of us at some point have to come to terms with the fact that our parents are flawed, that our parents are human, that our parents have limitations, that our parents have histories that predate us, that are complicated, that have made them the people that they are. And I think for me, and I think, you know, in this webinar in particular, because we're talking about grief, I wasn't allowed to grieve the loss of my father when I was 10. I hardly saw him. I was only able to see him for a lunch or dinner once a week for the next few years. He could not afford to have us come to an apartment where we could see him. He had been the primary stay-at-home parent. He taught at Yale Drama School, but the rest of the time he was home with us. And that loss of my father from my daily life, that loss of my idealized, romanticized view of my father, I was not allowed to grieve that. I was not allowed to talk about it. I had to soldier on and be strong for him and also be strong for my mother. And I didn't tell my mother any of my feelings of sadness because I could tell I didn't want her to feel guilty that she had ended the marriage. So I was sort of protecting both of my parents from my feelings of sadness and loss. And I think that's one of the most important messages of the book, is that grief will always catch up with you, and you can keep postponing it and denying it and speeding through your life, taking care of other people. But eventually you have to look within. And I think that was the most challenging part of the book, was my editor and my agent saying to me, you have to feel empathy for little Priscilla. Like exactly what you were saying, Allison. That's exactly what they wanted readers to feel. And they wanted me to finally look at myself when I was a little girl and say, wow, that was really hard.
That's an incredible admission, Priscilla, because it sounds like writing this memoir, The Critic's Daughter, put you in a position where you were really grappling with your emotions, but also grappling with the words on the page.
Mm-hmm.
And that's tough. We've done some conversations during this series about writing about grief,
Mm-hmm.
giving yourself permission to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you did the work.
So much work, Allison. Oh my goodness. And I think, it's interesting that you started with my academic background. So as an academic, you're never allowed to write about yourself. It has to be very objective. You take the I out of it. It's not personal. You're not supposed to have emotions in your writing. And my first book, so The Anti-Romantic Child, a memoir of unexpected joy. I mean, it really goes with this reimagining thing, right? My older son is autistic, and it's a book that uses the poetry of Wordsworth, who is the poet that I studied and taught as an academic, to talk about how I had this image of what it would be to be a mother, and a child as imaginative and playful and affectionate. And in some way, I think in becoming a mother, I was hoping that I was going to recapture that magical childhood that I had with my father, that I had lost when my father was 10. So, and then of course, by the end of the book, I remember I was on MSNBC Live when the book came out, and Thomas Roberts was like, it was excerpted in Newsweek, and they titled it "The Child You Didn't Dream of." And Thomas Roberts said, "You're going to get some flack. The anti-romantic child, the child you didn't dream of." And I said, yes, but if the subtitle is a story of unexpected joy.
Yes.
In other words, by the end of the book, Benjamin puts me in touch with a deeper sense of romanticism, with a sense of wonder and awe and mystery, and accepting my son in all of his complexity, and not vis-a-vis a projection or a fantasy of what he was going to be, but in terms of the beautiful individual that he is.
All right, stop right there, because that sounds like radical acceptance.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that is also how you would characterize your relationship with your dad.
100%, Allison. I think that this book, The Anti-Romantic Child, my father, I set up the book with a little, like 2 to 3 pages about my childhood with my father. And readers really responded to that. And they were like, they wanted to hear more about that. But I think my father, in his work as a critic, yes, he was, he wrote an essay in 1961 called "On the Necessity of Destructive Criticism." And yes, he was interested in confrontation criticism, and he was interested in taking down sacred cows and deflating hype. But essentially, my father was an enthusiast. He was a romantic, and he wrote harsh reviews because he believed in truth and art, and he believed in telling the truth. And his favorite playwrights were Chekhov. His last book was on Chekhov, a full-length book on Chekhov. And his most famous book is The Making of Modern Drama, where he writes about Beckett and Brecht, Strindberg, Ibsen, Chekhov. And he celebrated writers who were complicated, who wrote complicated stories, who didn't shy away from darkness, who saw human beings in all their frailty and accepted them. And I think my father, both in the way he parented me and in his critical work, prepared me to be the best parent possible to my 2 unusual children, because my younger son turned out to be, it's not in the first book, but turned out to have severe dyslexia and dysgraphia. He was also in special education. So I had 2 I wrote a piece called Ernie and Bert's Mother, speaking of Sesame Street. Like if Ernie and Bert had a mother. But it's funny, Alison, in terms of radical acceptance. My father was very opposed to labels, pigeonholes, categories, reducing people to a common denominator. He was very invested in celebrating each person for who they were individually. And I write this piece where I'm like, Benj is Bert and James is Ernie. And then as soon as a piece was published, each of them was like, but I sort of have some qualities of Bert. And I identified with Ernie. And I was like, oh my gosh, you guys, I'm guilty of typing you too. You're both Ernie and you're both Bert.
I think we are all, it's easy to create images of our children or our parents.
Exactly.
Silo them off as it's one monolith, or that a character can be simplified. And I think what your book does so beautifully is that it untangles that notion where we can be more than just a single type, right? We can be a combination of types and personalities and pros and cons and all of that stuff. And that's the work of grieving, right? That's the work of making amends in our mind of maybe what has been not what we had most wanted or envisioned. Before I go on to my next line of questioning, I wanted to pause for this little moment just so people can know how they could stay in touch with you. I am very on time. We will be done, I promise, at the strike of 2:00 Eastern time. I will not keep anyone here a minute longer. I know we are all so busy. So before I forget, I know for sure Priscilla would love to stay in touch and to hear more from you if we don't get to see you in the chat today. You are on Twitter at Priscilla Gilman. You are on Instagram at Priscilla.Gilman. Do not forget the dot on Instagram. And on Facebook, you are Priscilla Gilman author. And so there are 3 ways at least to stay in touch with Priscilla. Of course, your website is PriscillaGilman.com. And we, of course, would not be here without For Grief. And For Grief is on Facebook. For Grief is on Instagram. And just wanted to make sure that if folks do need to step away, they don't feel like they can't engage with you after 2:00. I know we all love staying involved and in touch and continuing these conversations. So I want to pivot to really the heart, what I took away as being the heart of your book, which is really the death of your dad. That gives rise to all of these considerations that we have been discussing. You mentioned lung cancer. My father died of lung cancer also. You mentioned your dad was 83 when he died. My dad was 63 when he died. And this is what Nick Hornby said about your book. Beautiful, honest, raw, careful, soulful, brave, and incredibly readable. Your father's illness struck me because it played out over so many miles. You mentioned that he was now at that point living in Japan. My dad was up the block, still in New York City. So I had access to him when he was the most frail. And I'm wondering what that was like for you, being so far away. And I'm thinking that many people can relate, especially during COVID, right? Not having physical access to their loved ones when they are ill. What was that like?
It was so hard. So Alison, my father first had a heart attack when he was in his late 60s and he was in Japan. He ended up marrying a Japanese woman who taught in Kyoto. And he actually was still living most of the year in New York City, teaching at the Yale School of Drama, but he was there for the summer and he had a heart attack. And then 5 years later, he was there for the summer, not permanently living there, planning to come back, and was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer and was told that he had 7 months to live. He ended up living 9 years. The last few years were pretty horrific, but he was able to travel back to the States for the first few years but not to teach anymore. And so he essentially moved to Japan at that point because the health insurance was better there and my stepmother could not leave her job. And so I only saw him in the summer when he would come. And then I went to Japan 5 times, I think. And the trip was 23 hours, door to door. And of course, there was no video chat. This was in the late 1997, he was diagnosed. We sent faxes. It was the era of faxes. I would cut out the articles from the New York Times about the New York Giants, our football team, and tape them or glue them onto a piece of paper and put them through the fax machine. I would videotape the Giants games and send them overnight mail, like $150, $200, whatever, to Japan. We did everything we possibly could, my sister and I, and my brother, to stay in touch with him, but it was exceptionally difficult. And for the last 2 years of his life, he did not speak. He did not move. He was essentially in a waking coma at home on a hospital bed in his apartment with my stepmother.
Do you feel that you were able to tell him what you needed to tell him? What did you leave on the table that perhaps is something that you've also had to grapple with?
Yes, that is such a great question. I didn't tell him everything, and I think this book is my way of telling him everything. I played my role until the end of being the cheery one and the optimistic one. And I write in the book about how I'm trying to cheer him up and say, he was told he had 7 months to live. And I'm saying, but people outlive their prognoses. And he said, no, he did not want to be given false hope. But it was so natural for me to play that role of being the comforter and the cheer upper that I did it. And I don't anymore, because writing about this, I've helped to process it. And I feel like this is out there and I've written it all down. I wanted him to know that I knew about his affairs. I wanted him to know that I knew about all these unsavory things, because we never discussed any of it. I protected him from knowing that I knew, because I knew he wouldn't want me to know. And now I do know, and I still love him and I accept him. And I understand that when you're in a miserable marriage to somebody who's not in love with you, you do things that you're not proud of, right? And I understand that he lived in an era before there was medication for severe depression. And so he was self-medicating with cigarettes. I understand all of it. I wish I could have told him while he was alive, but I've told him now in writing.
That's powerful. A part of that is a release for you.
Yes, yes.
And that has to be good for your own well-being. And I wonder if you can talk about forgiveness, even after a death, when you cannot say, I forgive you to somebody any longer.
I really feel, my father was Jewish, converted to Catholicism, wrote a memoir about it. At the end of his life, fell away from Catholicism, had a Catholic wake after he died, which is very interesting. His memoir was called Faith, Sex, Mystery. Came out when I was in high school. I believe in something mysterious. I believe that I can converse with my father, even though he's no longer here. I believe that what I say to him and about him in this book resonates with him. I believe that speaking to a lost loved one, whether it's in your head or on the page or in conversation with another family member, matters and resonates and changes things. It's never too late to say these things. And I think that my father would not want me to feel regret about not saying things, because I did. I lived with regret for a while. And my brother, who is 12 years older from my father's first marriage, would keep going back to Japan in hopes that he would be able to say something or have some kind of breakthrough with my father. And then my father was not able to speak. And so he was not able to talk back to him. And it was when my brother realized he knows deep down how I feel. I don't have to keep saying it again and again. I don't have to keep hoping for some made for the movies moment where we both sob and we hug each other and it's all like, no, he knows deep down.
I want to encourage everyone to put their comments and questions in the chat. I'm going to ask Christina to go through the chat any minute now to make sure that you are heard. You came here for a reason today. Something about Priscilla Gilman spoke to you. Something about her new book, The Critic's Daughter, appealed to your sensibilities. I do not want you, we were talking about regret. I don't want you at the strike of 2:00 Eastern time to regret not asking Priscilla the question or to tell her what's on your mind. So while Christina is going through the chat, I will remind you how to be in touch with her. Priscilla Gilman is her Twitter handle. Priscilla.Gilman, don't forget the dot, is on Instagram, Facebook, Priscilla Gilman author, PriscillaGilman.com. I am, of course, Allison Gilbert, and you can find me at A Gilbert Writer. For grief, if you want to have more material to get you through what you are experiencing right now, For Grief has a page on Facebook. It also has a community board where you can join, and you have to be accepted. So it's kind of private. So if you want to air something and you want to kind of keep it private in this little For Grief community, you can. And For Grief is on Instagram too. So with that, I'm going to ask Christina to go through the chat and ask some questions.
Okay, first we have a question that says, my dad had dementia and I had to sell his car to get it away from him. He remained angry with me until the day he died, and I have so much regret about that. We were never able to reconcile. Any advice on how to come to peace with that?
I will say, everybody, you can also send me a message through my website. I write books to help people, both of my books. I write books to establish a sense of solidarity and community, because I was very alone in my experiences. So dementia is so hard. My sister's husband's father just died of Alzheimer's 10 days ago. And I've lost a number of close people in my life to dementia and Alzheimer's, and 2 of them were very angry in the last few years. And I think the best advice I can give, my grandmother was very angry in the end, she had dementia, is to try to remember the times when they weren't angry, when there was something positive. That I don't think that anger that comes out in the end when they're suffering from dementia is their truest or their best self. My father also had an anger problem. So I write in the book about experiencing his anger at various points and being afraid of it. And it was really, for me, learning to put it into a kind of larger context. And I do think it happens so often, even with the most gentle and patient people, that when they're suffering from dementia, this strange anger can come. You did what you needed to do to keep him safe. I'm sure of that. So he may have been angry at you for doing that, but you were acting in his best interests and being the best daughter that you could be in what you did.
That's so helpful. Thank you. Christina, what else?
Joanne was a caregiver for her sick parents for almost 3 years, and she says they've since passed away, and she says she has so many regrets of things she could have done, guilt for having to drop her kids off to care for her parents, and she's trying to mend those relationships now that her parents are gone. Do you have any advice for that?
Oh, I feel so much empathy with you. My kids were very little when my father was sick, and I had to go to Japan and leave my 2-year-old for 2.5 weeks once. And I still have moments where I feel guilty about that. And he mentioned to me, he said, I remember when you were gone and I didn't think you were ever coming back. But I think the best advice that I can give is you were doing the best that you could possibly do at that time. You were impossibly torn between different valuable and important people in your life. The fact that you were caring for your parents, both of them, I imagine, as they were declining, it takes an unimaginable toll. And I would just encourage you to be patient and kind with yourself and to have compassion for yourself, because you were doing the impossible, essentially.
That brings up something that I thought maybe we can go to just for a moment, because it just seems too perfect not to. But one aspect of your life right now, Priscilla, is something that, with permission, I asked you if I could share this.
Yeah.
You are a certified, I'm going to read my notes so I don't get it wrong. You are a certified mindfulness and loving kindness meditation teacher.
Mhm.
What?
I know. I did a teacher training 6 months in 2017 to 2018. I have meditated since I was in my early 20s.
Can I ask you a
And
favor,
Mhm.
Priscilla? Just because we're on this self-care, giving ourselves some grace, we do have some minutes, maybe for a few, and I'll get back to the questions. Can you give us maybe a few minutes of, I'm going to read it again, mindfulness and loving kindness meditation? Can you give us a couple of minutes of that?
Sure. You can keep your eyes open or you can close your eyes, whatever feels most comfortable for you. I'm looking at a few of you. Dropping the shoulders and just try to lean into whatever you're sitting on, feeling as comfortable as you can. And just feeling at peace with this moment, in this community, knowing that you are safe and held in this space with people who have experienced similar things, with people who understand. And just taking a nice deep breath in and just releasing. And with every breath in, imagine that you're taking in the nourishment of community. And as you're breathing out, you're gently, not forcefully, letting go of anything that does not serve you. Breathing out any regrets, frustrations, tension in your body and your mind. Breathing in a sense of ease and peace and well-being. Knowing that at any given moment, you are doing the best that you can. Dropping the shoulders, doing a quick scan of your body, noticing if there's tension in any particular place, breathing into that place, and wishing yourself ease and peace and joy. Joy is not happiness. Joy you can experience even when you are in despair, even when there is anguish, when there is loss, when there is suffering in your life. Joy is tapping into that deepest part of yourself, feeling at peace, knowing that you are worthy, that you did the best you could, and that you deserve care. And those hurt or broken or lost parts of you, the little child you were when you first experienced some kind of loss or grief, the adult self that experienced a wrenching loss. Embrace all of yourselves in those moments of loss and feel that sense of peace. And all of us in this virtual room uphold you and support you and send you empathetic wishes. We're all sending them to each other. And I feel yours for me, by the way.
Oh
So
my
we only,
gosh,
so we
Priscilla.
can open our eyes now.
I just feel so like that is a gift in the middle of my day. It might be the beginning of the day for some folks, out in California and out west, but in the middle of my day, what a sense of peace.
You, Shannon.
Thank you for that. I see your next book before my eyes.
Oh, I haven't decided on it yet, Allison, so you'll have to tell me what you think.
I want to just mention something that came up for me as you were giving us that beautiful moment, which is how we can purposefully carve out that kind of time for ourselves and the importance for us to do that
Yes.
because nobody else will.
Exactly.
And I have found that as a wife and as a mother and as a worker and as a writer, it's like I could work 24 hours a day and nobody else would actually truly care about my well-being.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, of course, I'm not saying my husband or my kids, but like the people who I work for or the people who I work adjacent to,
Mhm.
they just want productivity.
Yes.
And I think it's up to us to really pay attention to our needs because we don't have those people making sure that we are
Exactly.
taking care of ourselves. And I feel like that is an important part of your story here, Priscilla.
Oh, it's
Is
such an important part of my story, Allison. Oh, yes. Because
Yeah.
I was on the fast track, right? Getting an early to Yale, going straight from the undergrad into the PhD program, having kids much younger than my friends, most of them, and being on this fast track. And I think being on that fast track and succeeding and being productive in a worldly sense, whatever it was all in a way, in a sense, a way of postponing and not dealing with grief.
Mm,
And I think that when we rush through our lives and we do and we do and we do and we succeed and we accomplish, it's all well and good, but it can often be a distraction and a way of avoiding going deep, slowing down, focusing on what really matters most. Right.
This is like super important. You know, there is one, I think I just stepped on you a little bit, so I apologize.
No,
but
not at all. Not at all.
It just brought up an idea. When I wrote the book that this series is named for, Past and Present, it's all about keeping memories of loved ones alive. And there are 85 ideas in that book for honoring and celebrating and remembering loved ones. One idea of those 85, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Give grief 100%. And what that means is not every day, not every moment, but if you're able to block time to invest in uncomfortable emotions fully,
Exactly.
you're able, in my opinion, then to re-engage in things that do perhaps bring you joy, because you haven't devalued uncomfortable, sad feelings. You have not given those feelings short shrift.
Oh,
You've given them the attention that they deserve. And so that is what I believe, Priscilla, you are talking about.
Allison, I could not agree more. I absolutely could not agree more. And for me, I learned how to do transcendental meditation when I was in my early 20s. And then I did mindfulness much later, but TM, you do twice a day for 20 minutes.
Mm.
And just knowing, I would say to my kids when they were very little, I'm sorry, mommy has to go meditate and I have to go in the room and shut the door. And they would respect that. And it was often during those meditations when I would be sitting or lying down, Allison, and tears would start coming out of my eyes. And I'm like, where is this coming from? And it's because I left the world of doing and action and accomplishment, and I was in touch. And I also talk in the book about when I would sing to my kids at night. And this was a way of remembering my parents, and very true to the spirit of your wonderful book, singing songs that my father used to sing to me, to my kids. And that was both keeping the parent alive, the grandparent alive for my children, but it was also a way for me in the dark to cry without my children seeing it, and to remember and to feel those feelings of sadness and loss. My children only have one
yourself
grandparent.
the time. Yes.
Give yourself the time.
Give yourself the time.
Yeah.
If we keep pushing it back,
Yes.
it really actually, the research shows, does damage because you are not honoring the full experience of what we are describing. And so it takes time, it takes energy, it takes a level of agency.
Yeah.
You need to have a level of proactivity to carve that out for yourself, because as we just talked about before, there are many people who want you to be productive, at work, transactional, put food on the table,
Yeah.
drive them somewhere,
Yep.
do that task at work.
Mhm.
What we are talking about is doing something that maybe you want to call transactional for yourself, which is creating that time for yourself to be in fully your emotions. And I feel like that gives you freedom to then embrace other parts of your life more fully. Christina, let's make sure we answer a few more questions, and then I will make the announcement about the change underfoot for the past and present series.
Okay, Shani writes, I found it really difficult to not only have sad or negative associations with reminders of the people in my life who've passed away. She'd like advice on how to have happy or different associations with people that she's lost.
Mm.
You know, and that's I'm a little uncertain about the impressions where they come from, but I guess I would say, you know, my father had a hideous death. He was in horrible shape for the last few years of his life. I have very vivid traumatic images of what he looked like and what he sounded like. And it was only after he died that I was able to go back to those earlier associations. And so I don't know if you're talking about associations with illness and decline or just bad memories. But I think in both cases, I think I would suggest photographs of happy times, looking at them, talking about them with people who were at those experiences, trying to remember the person at their best, whether it's at their physical best or at their emotional best. You know, how did you connect with that person productively and positively? Just try and maybe making a list. I think making lists, and I think writing, you don't have to be a writer to use writing as a tool for coping with grief.
I would also add, there's a great opportunity for using your 5 senses when we are trying to remember our loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is the sense of taste is an incredibly important tether to our past, whether or not that's shopping for the ingredients in that special dish, whether or not it's the prep work of that dessert, whether or not it's the taste that reminds you of that time. That's taste. One more example is hearing. What music
Oh,
your
yes.
loved one
Yes.
love? And I want to lower the temperature on that idea. That may cause some people to feel a little bit of a panic, like, I don't know the name of the artist, or I don't know the name of the song. Perhaps you do, and that's great. However, that's not necessary. What I mean by that is, if there's just a genre of music that you recall, maybe it's big band music, maybe it's just classical, maybe it's show tunes. Just try to lower the bar so you can crack open this opportunity for
Annie.
connection. And think about those 5 senses in perhaps a different way. And I think that helps. And I hope that answers that question, just maybe in a different way. Oh, someone put in Annie. Yes, sing Annie. sing those show tunes.
Oh.
So let me just pivot just for a second and to make that announcement, and then I'll come back and we'll do a few more questions. I'm hoping that we have time. I'll make this very, very brief. So we at For Grief and Reimagine, and of course, me too, have been thinking about how to make this series even more impactful. Andy and I were talking about how long has this past and present series been going on? It's a long time. It's been years, right, Andy? Years we're thinking?
2020.
Oh, okay. So now we know for sure. And it's been the last Thursday of every single month, and I've been able to bring on incredible, I think you guys hopefully will agree, incredible experts and authors and writers and dreamers and thinkers. And I've just been so blessed. So going into the new year, we were trying to think about how we can make this even better. How can we improve? So here's what we have decided to do. There is an end and then there's a beginning. This is the final past and present event like this. We will no longer do it the last Thursday of every month. So that's the sad news. But instead, here's the good news. We are instead going to do a 3-part in-depth series this fall consecutively. So I have the dates. You don't have to commit this to memory. We'll send you a note about this. Do not worry. But if you want to take a note, and Christina will put it in the chat, we're going to keep the Thursdays. Thursday, September 28th. Thursday, October 26th. And just because of Thanksgiving, Thursday, November 16th. We are going to choose a single theme that will be the connective tissue of all 3 events. And we're going to bring guests on to explore this one topic in greater detail. So we think this is innovative and exciting and meaningful. And here's what I need of everyone who's here and listening. What theme would you like us to explore? I would love to hear from you. You can email me at allison@allisongilbert.com. You can join the Facebook community group that is For Grief. You can join, you can talk about it there. You can spit out ideas in the For Grief community group, but we do want to hear your ideas. So that is that. September 28th, October 26th, and November 16th. I hope you guys like this new iteration of the Past and Present series. I know I am excited about it. Andy, are you excited?
Very.
Yeah. Okay, Priscilla, we have 3 minutes left. I'm going to remind people how to be in touch with you. PriscillaGilman.com, Priscilla Gilman on Twitter, Priscilla.Gilman on Instagram, Priscilla Gilman author on Facebook. Priscilla, 2 minutes left. What is one key takeaway that you would want to leave folks with today about moving forward in grief when there's a complicated relationship with a parent?
First, I just want to thank you all. I'm seeing these comments and I just keep getting tears in my eyes. And I just so appreciate this beautiful space of community and connection and support. And I think the biggest takeaway that I would give is that we never get over grief. There's not going to be a moment where you're not going to be grieving. You're going to grieve for the rest of your life. And it's the people who say, why aren't you over it? Come on, it's been 6 months. It's been a year. It's been, for my father, 15 years, 17 years. But it gets easier, and it's easier to handle it when you carve out the time to feel those feelings of sadness. It's completely normal, acceptable, and beautiful to feel sad about someone that you've lost. And to try to look at that person in all their complexity, not to deny the more complicated aspects of their being, but for me, in writing about my father, understanding how frail he was, how vulnerable he was, how the pressures in his own life, the difficulty that he was not parented well by his parents, and he was doing the best he could with me and my sister and my brother. And never to feel shame or guilt about feeling sad or feeling conflicted or feeling overcome by grief. I still have days when I can't get out of bed sometimes, and it's been a long time. Those days are many, many fewer than they used to be. And I'm not overcome to the extent that I used to be because I've really worked on it. I've processed it. I've come face to face with it. And I have forgiven my father for all of the flaws and limitations, and my mother too, because it's a complicated story when you have parents who split up and you love both of them and they don't love each other. That's a very complicated thing.
I can't end it any better than that. It is the strike of 2 o'clock here in New York. I can't recommend this book enough. I know you, Priscilla, and I learned so much about you, and I I'm grateful for this time. So thank you, everybody. I hope you like this new idea we have going forward with the past and present series. And I cannot wait to see you in September, beginning this 3-part in-depth series. Please tell us the themes or the one theme that you would like us to pursue. And we're available always. So
Of these
please get in
two
touch.
opposing things are different.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was
Bye,
wonderful to
guys.
be
Thank
with
you.
you.
I'm
Thank
so grateful.
you.